Hi and welcome to my vlog. This time I'm going to be talking about using up my dump sheets, which I use for cleaning my rollers during printing sessions. So these are usually bigger sheets of paper and I don't like anything to go to waste, so I'm going to do some printing over the top of what I've got here. So I'm just going to start by putting down a layer of this nice olive green colour. And just roll off the excess paint onto my dump sheet. And I'm going to go back to using my weeds. So just scattering those across the surface of the gel plate. I'm just going to take my dump sheet and turn it over and just print a section of it at a time. And just give that a nice firm rub, just so I can feel the weeds underneath the paper. So this is just about building up layers of print and paint on the same sheet of paper. Just give that a good rub. Make sure I've worked the paper in between the grass stems. And there we go. So that's the first layer. There's still quite a lot of paint on the plate, so I'm just going to use a piece of wet strength tissue just to have another go at lifting the excess paint. So the dump sheet paper is just a plain white easel paper, which isn't quite as absorbent as the tissue. So there we go, a couple of layers of print. Remove the weeds. Alright, and now I'm going to just come back in with a couple of different colours this time. So the green paint that's on the plate has dried, so now I know I can come back over the top with the next layer without disturbing the green layer. So I'm just going to mix these two colours directly on the plate and roll that out. So I'm not too worried about mixing the colours perfectly, because that in itself will create an interesting paint layer when I come to do the print. So back to the dump sheet, and this time I'm just going to sort of move it along and print a different section of the paper. I'll just take off the excess paint there on the tissue. Okay, let's have a look and see what we've got. So those colours have worked quite nicely together. And there we go. So I can still just see underneath some of those structural stripes created by the roller on the dump sheet. So already those layers are starting to build. Okay, time for the next layer. Using a bit of black paint for this one. And back to my weeds. Okay, so this time I'm just going to print one corner of the dump sheet. Just take off some of that paint. And then I'm just going to move the paper and print a different area on the same sheet. And just pick up as much of that paint as possible, just by giving the plate a little rub. Okay, so I've just lifted most of the paint, and now I've got two different sections printed on the dump sheet. And I've still got a little bit too much paint in between some of these stems, so I'm just going to lift that using this piece of tissue. And that's got some quite interesting marks as well. Okay, so I'm just remove the weeds, and then I'm just going to let that dry fully before I do the next step. And back to blue for the next layer. So if you watched my weedy print vlog, you'll know that I'm looking for a fairly thin layer of paint at this stage, so you can see how the black paint is still visible underneath this blue colour, and that's what we're aiming for. So I'm just going to remove some of that excess paint from the roller straight onto the dump sheet. Lift a little bit more. Okay. So back to my dump sheet. Same thing, I'm not going to print the whole plate in one place. I'm just going to print a corner. And then I'm going to use some of these extra pieces that I've created to print at the same time. And that's created quite a nice stripe. Just going to leave that a bit longer and let it dry. Okay, ready now. That's a lovely colour combination. So we've got some of the green showing through from the original print. And let's have a look at this one. Oh yes, that's lovely, isn't it? So when I'm doing this, I'm not worrying about what I'm losing underneath. I'm thinking about what I'm gaining by printing over the top. Now this sheet of paper is actually just a bit of wax paper that I was using for rolling out some gesso. So this won't be any good for collage, I don't think, but it's just got a really interesting surface texture. So I'm just gonna use it to take my first sort of graphic print of this next go. So I've got another dump sheet started here, so I'm just going to show you an alternative way to get some impressions from the grass stems. So this time I've just put those down on the table. I'm just going to roll that excess paint off the roller onto the paper, and you can see how it's just picking up what's underneath. So that's quite lovely, and that'll be really useful if I want some nice dark collage papers. So I can just add glaze to that sheet in the right colour. But back to the weeds on the plate. Let's have another go. So I'm just doing all this in one sort of continuous printing session. I very rarely get the plate out just to take a single print. So I was just interested to try this because the paper was so textured. So we'll just give it a go and see what comes up. Ooh. Well, there we go. That's quite interesting in itself, isn't it? Okay, I'm still just going to have another go at lifting some of that extra paint off the plate from between the grass stems. So just using this second dump sheet to do that. Oh, that's nice too. So I'm just building up this sheet with interesting structural lines. So this time I'm going to use some matte medium instead of a layer of paint to lift what's left on the plate. So just popping a bit down there, just using a spatula. Just roll it out in the same way that you would with paint. But obviously that's going to give you a translucent layer of adhesive basically. So get that nice and even best I can. And back to my first dump sheet. And this time I'm just going to print roughly in the middle. So I've just let that dry so that the back of the paper feels nice and dry, not too damp. And here we go. That's pulled off most of it, not all of it. Let's see if we can get any more off. Just using a piece of tissue. No, that looks like it's dried. I'll just make sure I've removed any remaining medium. Okay, so I'm just going to come back with paint now. See if I can lift that section. And again, just looking for a nice thin layer of paint. Okay, let's have a look. I'm just going to print half of it on one dump sheet, and then take my second dump sheet and finish it off. See what we've got. There we go. So lots of different layers on a much bigger sheet of paper. Just by moving the sheet around and just printing sections at a time, I've ended up with all kinds of interesting marks and different layers of colour, and you can still see the structure of those original roller marks on the paper underneath. So it's just a great way to mix and match. No wastage. And lots of interesting textures there to go at for collage. So that's my haul from the session. Coloured dump sheet, a monochrome dump sheet, a separate print on the wax paper, all with these interesting kind of unifying marks from the grass stems. Just a lovely collection of interesting papers.